Let's run hot sheet. Scott Braun, along with Baseball America's JJ Cooper, and Carlos Collazo is with us for the top of the show. So first off, just a reminder, I'm going to do this for the rest of spring training because we put a lot of hard work into this. If you want to know more about the top prospect per organization, according to Baseball America, we have a solution for you. It's on the YouTube channel right now. You can catch most of the top prospect reports. We dive a little deeper into most of the other clubs as well in terms of what else is in the cupboard for them. And we have a few more still to come. So look out for those. And podcast-wise, if you're listening, we have those versions via division by division. Some of them are out already. Some of them still to come. So check all of those out, and let's hit first move. All you to start here, Carlos. New mock draft season is around the corner. So what do you have for us? And most importantly, what has changed in your mind?
Yeah, it is officially mock draft season. We've got a long time to go before the actual draft. And so this mock is more of us trying to actually line up the talent as best we can. It's still far too early to have confidence in any specific team player connections. I think every team in the game is really just casting such a wide net at this point because there is no clear 1-1 in the class. It's not like you can just chalk up the first player on the board with confidence and then start working your way down the board. It's mostly just seeing early season performances, who's raising their stock, who's maybe falling in their draft stock. And so for this mock, we actually got a scout to go pick by pick with me. We alternated picks, went through 40. So every team's first pick is accounted for here, and really just tried to line up the board as best we could at the moment. And I would say right now it feels fairly pitcher heavy at the top of the class. I think there are some questions about the top end college bats. Our 1-1 on the board currently, Jace LaViolette, is trending down early to start the year. So where he went in this mock, I was actually really curious to see where our scout picker, if you would pick him before I just felt obligated to get him off the board. But it's Jamie Arnold in the 1-1 hole. At this point, he, I think, has done the best job of establishing himself as the top player in the class. He entered the year inside of our top 5 as the top overall pitcher in the class, has really posted through his first 3 starts, checks all the boxes that you would want to see from an elite college pitcher. And we've talked to scouts who think he could be in the big leagues as a mid-rotation arm as soon as next year. So in terms of upside, proximity, and performance early this spring, he's been one of the absolute guys to know.
The thing that stands out to me that Carlos made the point, when you're looking at this right now, when you're looking at this early, there are years where you kind of already know or you expect, right? The year that Adley Rutschman and Bobby Witt Jr. came into the season at the top of the class, we kind of knew, like, okay, barring something stunningly unexpected, those guys are going to be the guys at the end. The year we had Dylan Cruz, Paul Skeens was not, he kind of had to ascend to the top of that class, but it was something where you kind of knew you had your top group, and it was a question of which of those top guys was going to go to the top. Carlos, when I look at this year, when I look at this first mock, when I'm talking to you, and all the kind of coverage that the reporting y'all are doing on the draft, the thing that really does jump out is I kind of feel like right now there's a much bigger group of players who are in the zone of possibility to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that a fair way to kind of describe it as we sit here in March, talking about a draft that'll happen in July?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, there were at least 5 guys that I would have felt confident in putting in that one spot on this mock. I think there are some players beyond that group, college hitters like Merrick Houston and Dean Curley, who could continue to play themselves further up the board. They went in the top 10 of this mock draft. The way I've been describing it to teams as I'm reaching out and trying to get more feedback is it feels very muddled at the top. There is a lot of talent, but it's not, like you mentioned, there's no Adley Rutschman, there's no Bobby Witt Jr., there's no like clear cut. This player is in a tier of his own. He's obviously going to go off the board early. As we were working down the board when we were in the late teens and the early 20s, I actually was pretty excited about the talent still available. So I definitely do still think this class, it's a draft that stands out more for its depth than its just elite top end talent. For me personally, I think a high school right-handed pitcher might be the biggest upside player in this draft. That's Seth Hernandez. He has been really good early to start the year. He goes 3rd in this mock draft specifically, but I wouldn't be stunned if we had a profile like that at the top of this draft, because maybe it's just one of those years where you get a really rare talent from a high school pitcher. the top end bats maybe are lacking or have enough questions. But also at the end of the day, if Ethan Holiday goes 1-1, I don't think that should surprise anyone. So the best way I can describe it now is it is fairly wide open.
The other thing that stood out from what you just said in our conversations as you were kind of working on this mock draft, this is a draft where having multiple picks and picking in the middle of the first round may be a really good spot to be in some ways, isn't it? Like, this is a draft. Yeah, it's never bad to pick 1-1. Congrats to the teams who get to pick at the very top of the draft. But if you have multiple picks middle of this first round and on, the depth of this class might really pay off that way, isn't it?
I would say so. I mean, teams like the Rays, the Brewers, the Orioles, teams that are picking in the middle of the first round or the back third of the first round with their first overall pick, and then have some extra picks and some extra pool money. I think they've got to be very excited about the players they're going to be able to line up for those second and third picks. It does not feel like a draft at this point where you're really pumped to have one of those top 6 lottery picks. Now, obviously, you're still picking at the top of the class. You're going to get a talented player, but at this point last year, we had a lot of college hitters in the country who were really taking steps forward. Charlie Condon, Travis Bazzana was hitting for a ton of power. You even mentioned Paul Skeens, his draft year. He didn't enter the year in that top 3 range that he finished in. But by this point in the 2023 draft, everyone was talking about how insane Paul Skeens looked. Jamie Arnold has been good. He has not leveled up to that degree. And so I definitely think the teams with a lot of extra picks, the teams picking in the back third of the first round, are going to be pretty excited because there is a depth of college hitter in this class that you'll see trickle down through the late teens and the 20s that those teams will be pretty excited about. But in terms of at the very top, I think all those teams picking up there are going to hope that these players line themselves up with a bit more precision by the time draft day comes.
More draft talk with a key name to know when we swing back. And then we'll also get to some fantasy baseball talk with Geoff Pontes joining us soon. Be right back. FT fam, if you love ripping packs of cards, there is a modern way to do that now on Arena Club with their slab packs and crats. I know you love ripping slab packs and getting that sweet card that you've always been looking for.
Yeah, and you don't have to go through all the other ones, all the Kratz cards that are in there. Bang, you just get the big one, the one that you're just peeking right around the corner when you open that pack, the one you expect to get.
Also, Arena Club will make you an instant offer for your card based on its market value. You'll get an instant offer of 90% of the estimated value, so you can accept it on the spot, simple, fast, and risk-free. Use that cash to buy more slab packs, and you can get your cards officially graded by Arena Club. So go check it out right now, FT fam. You can get 20% off your first slab pack or card purchase by going to arenaclub.com/foul and then use the code FOUL. That's arenaclub.com/FOUL, code FOUL for 20% off your first purchase. Get after it, FT fam. All right, we're back. Hopping back into Carlos's mock draft. So Jace LaViolette is a name I want to get to, and let's do it right now. What can you tell us? And, where could you see him potentially falling in the draft if things go well for him over the next few months?
If things go well for him over the next few months, I think he still has a chance to wind up a little bit higher in the draft than where we had him mocked this time, which was 11. And it pained me to keep making picks and seeing him not coming off the board. I was tempted to just not pick Jace at all and see how long it would take for our scout picker to take him off the board. I wound up taking him at 11 because it just felt like his tool set was too good at that range to keep him off the board. I followed up with our scout after I took him, and I was like, hey, if I just hadn't taken Jace, at what range would you have taken him in? And he was like, I would have him in a similar range, in the sort of 8 to 12 range. Ethan Conrad at Wake Forest went off the board in front of him, which I think was a little bit surprising to me at first, because in my mind, Jace has been ahead of him in that college outfield demographic for a long time. But he cited specifically the contact frequency just separated him from a guy like Jace. The big question with Jace entering this spring was how much is he going to hit? How much is he going to make contact? He had a ton of power. He walks a lot. He runs. He has all the tools in the world. But early so far this spring, he hasn't made a ton more contact than he previously does. We've also got questions from scouts kind of wondering if the athleticism and the body has backed up a little bit. He's not posting the best run times in the world anymore. And if you start to wonder about Jace maybe profiling more as a corner, and he still has those contact questions, and I think the profile just doesn't look quite as appealing as it maybe did preseason. And the way I've been saying it is I think with Jace, there are a little bit more questions now than answers. And that's obviously not the direction you want to go if you're trying to establish a lock on 1-1.
So let's kind of go into that a little bit more, Carlos. How much, again, everyone is aiming for July, right? On the team side. They don't have to make decisions right now. But at the same time, we are now far enough into the season. This is not something where it's like, oh, he had a bad first week, so we're moving him down. That's the feedback you're getting, is that there are concerns, that there are thoughts that maybe he fits kind of more to the back of that first tier than at the top. How obviously he can still kind of turn that around if he has a great SEC, conference slate. None of this that we're talking about right now will matter. But when you're how do you kind of balance that? Like, I do feel like that we're always trying to not overreact, but react. It seems like we're getting pretty consistent feedback this way, though, now. Like, that this is kind of where this kind of sits right now as we are here getting ready to go into conference play for those college teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the scout feedback that we are getting drives the rankings more than any sort of just looking at the stat line and the performance. But for college hitters, especially, the performance is super important. If you're going at the top of the draft as a hitter, you have to go out and hit, especially in a year where there's not a ton of separation between you and the next guy up. And guys like Dean Curley and Merrick Houston and Ivar Arquette are all mashing and profile at as good or better defensive positions. And so the performance is certainly a factor, but I think definitely when you start hearing from most of the scouts that you're reaching out to and they're saying, hey, we have some real concerns, we think he's sliding down the board, that is a lot more meaningful. And I think from a process standpoint with Jace, the swing just hasn't kind of looked peak Jace LaViolette. Like I'd mentioned earlier, the fact that the run tool maybe has backed up a little bit is concerning. The good news for Jace is that SEC play has not started yet. That starts this weekend. If he goes off and he looks like his typical self and he's making more contact against better competition, I think he's got a chance to climb right back up boards, because a slower 3 or 4 week start compared to just going off for SEC play, the SEC play is going to be a lot more important in terms of how you weight his production and his performance. But it certainly has not been the start that he's wanted right now. And I think it's sliding a little bit more into kind of the middle of the first round range, which maybe seems surprising when you think about just the raw tool set and pure upside that he has.
The other thing that does stand out from this mock, and check out the whole thing at baseballamerica.com, but you mentioned it. There actually are, you have a pitcher heavy top of this mock, but there are a lot of up the middle, college middle infielders, college shortstops in the top 10 here, which is kind of a demographic that teams always kind of end up migrating to at the end of the day. And when you're comparing Jace to some of those guys, if they're performing, there's generally going to be a little bit of an edge for the guys who are playing in the dirt, isn't there?
Yeah, I would say so, especially if you have as much or more confidence in their pure hit tools. Like at the very top, if you're a hitter, you want to draft the guys that you have a lot of confidence in the offense. So I would say so. Two other players I would just mention quickly who are in this mock, but I could see them easily moving up further on our next one, is Liam Doyle. At Tennessee, he's been the most dominant pitcher in the country at this stage. He's kind of an unusual profile, really reliant on one pitch, but that pitch is an exceptional fastball that is missing an absurd amount of bats. Going back to the shortstop demographic, Steele Hall on the high school side was a reclassification from the 2026 class. So he's young, he's hyper athletic, he's fast, he's turning in 80 grade run times, and he's added a lot of strength and power. So those are two names to keep in mind further down the board. But there's a lot of good commentary on all these players for our top 40 picks throughout this mock draft. It was a lot of fun to do.
I'll just add in that the 40 picks are because we wanted to make sure that every team got a pick, because you have to go to 40 to get all 30 teams to get their first pick.
Okay. That's actually important. That's helpful. And that's nice of you, because obviously, some fans don't get blessed with higher picks, although I would say they're probably pretty fortunate, because often that means your team is pretty damn good and you're picking in the back of draft, or maybe you had to give up a pick for, a qualifying offer, stuff like that. So anyway, Carlos, how many more in your estimation? How many more mocks will you do between now and the draft ish?
If JJ has his way, probably like 15. More realistically, I would say 6 more are probably on the way. We like to do them pretty regularly and then amp up as we get closer. But
Did just want to make sure, did he say 15 or did he say 5-0? Because, like
50 mocks. Carlos, thank you. Great to see you. We'll talk to you hopefully before the next mock, but soon. Okay.
absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you. That's Carlos Collazo from Baseball America. If you want to check out more from him, of course, you can do so. Go to baseballamerica.com, get yourself a subscription to the site and everything Baseball America has to offer if you don't have one already. BA also covers fantasy baseball. So, JJ, we don't do this often, but I want to test it out and see if we should do it more often. This is fantasy baseball draft season, and Geoff Pontes is going to help us out. We're going to go over a top 500 that is getting released, I believe, tomorrow. Right, Geoff?
Yeah, we've this is the third or fourth iteration of the top 500 this season. We did all the positional rankings prior to the start of the year, and then put out the full dynasty list a little bit after the beginning of the year. So we've updated a couple of times. We updated at one point in February. Early on in spring training, there's not a whole lot that you can really take away that's kind of concrete outside of, some injury news, etc. Over the last couple of weeks, there's obviously been a lot of stuff that's broken, big injuries, players with helium in camp, guys that, maybe we were a little shocked by that have really performed in major league games. And then, of course, some positional sort of battles, et cetera, that sort of thing. So we've been able to adjust for all that stuff. That's the list that will be out tomorrow.
So, Geoff, as you said, there's a lot that's kind of happening, a lot going on. And it's always that balance of we don't want to overreact to spring training, but we also don't want to not react to it because especially when you have an injury and it leads to a cascade effect and all that. But so who are a couple of players who kind of jump out to you as like, okay, they've already shown enough this spring that when this re-rank comes out, they're going to really kind of take a jump?
Yeah, I think, the first one who we were already pretty high on just based on, like, I do the Cubs list, I do the Astros list. So we had a lot of good Cam Smith information kind of already heading into ranking season. So we were really high on Smith. We moved him up even more. I don't know if I totally buy into him breaking camp with the Astros. I do think that the move to a corner outfield spot, probably just athletically and tools wise, probably is a better fit than third base. He's never been a great defensive third baseman. Obviously, with the departure of Kyle Tucker and others, there are some holes in that outfield. I think there's an opportunity there. The bat has looked very legit in major league games so far. He's had some big moments. I think, over the last year and a half, really since I first saw him on the Cape after his freshman year at FSU, it's really just been sort of green arrow, up. And he's just continued to sort of to tap into more contact, more approach, do it against better competition time and time again. So I think he's probably the biggest mover on the list. Another one that JJ is going to like quite a bit is Chandler Simpson. And I think, the fantasy community in particular really drives the bus on this type of prospect because he's the type of prospect that if he does come up and he does get a full-time role or, sees 400 plate appearances in a season, his ability to help you win that steal category and really set yourself apart, even though you're obviously giving up points and home runs and other areas, batting average, runs scored, and of course steals are just huge. And I think, people are tapped into playing time in the sense of, is this guy a good enough fielder that he's actually going to get run in center field? We've started to see some of those returns. We talked about it on a show a couple of weeks ago. I think, people have listened and the market has sort of adjusted that. Chandler, we've seen move up quite a bit. And the last one I'll throw out there, I think is just a catch-up game with Yariel Padilla. We had him really high in the handbook. I think, credit to my colleague Josh Norris's reporting coming out of the Dominican Summer League and then, his rankings that he did off of that. He really sort of put the hype into motion on Padilla. And I think just the time of year that those articles come out, people weren't able to adjust in their fantasy leagues. And we've seen him go a lot earlier in drafts because he was available, not even rostered, and is kind of considered, an up arrow prospect at this point. So those are three in particular that I would call out.
I can't if a Chandler Simpson topic is going to come up, I cannot weigh in, because the thing about Simpson that I think does jump out here, you're right. Like from a fantasy perspective, he's not going to give you 80 homers. He has, if you get one, you would count that as a bonus, and it's probably going to be an inside the Parker. But I think the thing that gets lost here is, well, for one, the Rays have outfield opportunities. This is not an organization right now that you look at the Rays outfield and say, okay, these guys are encased. They're just bolted into those positions. There are opportunities in that outfield, but Chandler Simpson's just a better all-around player than a lot of times he gets credit for. If you look at, to just take an example of this, if you look at Billy Hamilton, who was a good fantasy player, if not always a great, actual player, but Billy Hamilton gave you defense and speed, which doesn't help in fantasy, but he gave you speed. He gave you those steals. Chandler Simpson has that, but he also has a vastly better hit tool than Billy Hamilton did. So he might actually give you batting average and that speed. I think he's going to be that kind of, like, he could easily find his way to being a 1.5, 2, 3 WAR player even in good years. And Billy Hamilton did that, and Chandler Simpson's a better player than Billy Hamilton, I think.
All right, let me get to pitchers. We have breakout names right now. Oh, we got to get back to Geoff in just a sec. I think we lost him. Oh, there he is. All right, Geoff, breakout pitchers, because maybe this is a category where things can really change. You take most hitting stats with a grain of salt in spring training, especially from the veterans. But pitching wise, we see guys show up to camp looking sometimes very differently. And for me, actually, it's shifted more from velocity, as long as it's not, the numbers are way down and we're worried about an injury, and has more to do with pitch shape, pitch mix, adding a pitch. So any names that stand out right now from spring training that you could see as breakouts? No, not yet, Geoff. Still working on you, dude. You muted?
No problem. I think I'm back.
All right, here we go. You're back.
Yeah, I think a big one is obviously Ryan Weathers. Lance Brozdowski did some great reporting on it in terms of getting information. Going from a TrackMan park to a Hawkeye park last week, the data was down a little bit. It wasn't 19 inches of induced vertical break. It was more like 17 inches of induced vertical break, but it was still at 98 miles an hour from the left side. The lift that he's killing on his changeup has been legitimate. The improvements in terms of the gyro slider and some of those things. It still looks like a very robust pitch mix. Maybe it's not the potential 70 grade plus fastball that we thought it was. It's more like a 60 grade fastball, but still that kind of velocity and movement from the left side. I think this is one to buy in on. He seems like he's in better shape just physically. Hopefully that's going to lead to more endurance, less soft tissue injuries, et cetera, some of the stuff that he's dealt with throughout his career. But I do think Weathers is probably one in particular that I would call out. Another one, is Gavin Williams. And I think it's never really been the stuff with Gavin Williams. It's always just been the matter of health. He's added a two-seam shape. He's done some things differently. He wasn't mentioned in my article, but I think after watching the most recent start, it really feels like he could be set up for potential breakout. If we get, actual innings out of him, I think there's a chance that, Williams could turn into a top 20 sort of starter in fantasy. And that might even be, somewhat cautious just in terms of what the actual, ceiling is on a pitcher like this. And I think the last one I'd throw out there, Casey Mize. Casey Mize just looked like a different guy. I would almost throw it back to the Casey Mize that we had sort of seen prior to those injuries after his first full year in the minors, like when he threw no hitters and he made that jump from A ball up to AA and was just dominant. I saw him in Lakeland that year, saw him a couple weeks later in Hartford when he was with Erie and was just dominant. Then it kind of has just gone through and dealt with elbow stuff over the last couple of years. The ride's back on the fastball. He's getting more dynamic drop and more velocity on that splitter. Which makes it even harder pitch to hit and sort of tunnels well off of that fastball. Everything looks better with Casey Mize, and I think, this might be a potential bounce back for him in a big way to sort of the player that we thought he could be when he was drafted.
Yeah, 1-1 overall Casey Mize. It might take a little time, but hey, if it blossoms, this would be perfect timing for the Tigers because they really only needed him starting during this window. They haven't been good up until really the second half of last year. I want to go backwards for a moment, Geoff, to Gavin Williams and just double click on that one. So he's got a big fastball, but it was hit a lot last year. And at one point it was looked at, as potentially a plus pitch. He's got a lead extension. What do you think changed for him last year? Because it looked like the fastball in general was getting hit. He was using it up in the zone and it was getting hit. Is it something where hitters figured him out? Was there potentially a difference in the shape of the fastball that was making it more hittable?
I think a lot of it was just like heavy reliance on the four-seam fastball as his primary pitch. I think he was, dealing with some injuries and stuff like that. He's always kind of been nicked up. And when he's right, I think he commands it well and kind of puts it into the right zones. I think a big part of it, though, is just is he healthy? Is he consistently repeating his mechanics? He is a bigger body guy at 6'6", 250 pounds. So I think like when he's sequenced up well, everything does play up. And I think we've seen like just slight improvements to the secondary stuff as well. That the slider's a good pitch. It's getting more movement now. It's got more separation from a plane perspective off of the four seam than it used to have. He's got a good curveball, and they're two dynamically different sort of breaking ball shapes, and that works.
All right, let's finish with injuries. And JJ, I'll let you chime in first and then kick it over to Geoff. That has taken center stage over the past couple days. And I was thinking about this. I didn't say it out loud on Foul Territory, but I was like, man, we haven't had major injury news in the first couple weeks of camp. Not much. And then all of a sudden over the weekend, it's just a flurry of big names too. So what stands out for you?
Well, I want to put a fantasy component, but also a real life component to this. If you're the Yankees, it sure feels like a pretty rough start to your spring. Like Garrett Cole with the elbow, and we're seeing whether he's going to need Tommy John surgery. We know that Luis Gil is out for quite a while. Giancarlo Stanton could miss the whole year. The thing that just jumps out to me, I know that does create opportunities from a fantasy perspective, who's going to step in. But I feel like in a lot of cases, the answer here for the Yankees isn't someone who may be on the roster right now, because they didn't. The thing about the Yankees is that everyone's healthy. I felt like they had a better lineup than the Orioles, than the Red Sox, other teams in the East. But that's if everyone's healthy. And you take Garrett Cole away, you take even Stanton, who's, again, I know he's not the Stanton of old, but they don't have a lot of great answers there. But Geoff, kind of what do you see from a fantasy perspective? What are the injuries that really jump out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Cole is the big one. It does open up an opportunity for Will Warren, who's been a great spring performer this year. Two fastball shapes there with the four seam and the two seam. He's got an all-world sweeper. When you start to look at, some of the people like TJ Stats and others that put out the stuff models on Twitter, he just blows it up in terms of that sweeper. Good changeup. I think it's a good arsenal. He's throwing strikes. He's repeating mechanics, etc. Stuff that he struggled with previously, and he's performed in major league games against a couple of decent lineups right now. So I sort of feel like he's almost Michael Kingish entering the season. And now that there's an opportunity for him in the rotation, I would feel like he's the next logical choice for them. They're already spending a ton of money. I don't know how much prospect capital they have to go out and get somebody, but we'll see. I think on the Stanton side of it, they're saying Ben Rice. We'll see how this all works out in the end. I don't know if they would take Alex Verdugo back, but he is out there. There's other options they could possibly get as a corner outfielder. Maybe they DH Jason Dominguez. I don't know. It's sort of a question mark there. Kirby and Grayson Rodriguez are two others injuries that just sort of stink, and you got to figure out, who's going to take those spots in those rotations. There aren't necessarily like great options. I think with Seattle, you're looking at Emerson Hancock, you're looking at Logan Evans. Evans has outpitched Hancock so far. So maybe that's one, but he's not a huge strikeout guy. He's probably somebody you're just looking at more for ratios, etc. And I'm sure, this is just the tip of the iceberg with injuries we're going to see over the next couple of weeks, particularly on the pitching side. It's always a minefield walking through March after drafting in February or something, and knowing that, hey, this looks really good on paper, but eventually you're probably going to lose at least one, maybe two starting pitchers. Just always happens.
That's right. Yeah. It took a couple weeks this time, but now we're at that point. You've seen guys throw in games, couple starts, maybe a dead arm, maybe worse, all that. So we'll keep an eye on it. If you want more information, fantasy baseball wise, Baseball America, go click on the fantasy section, get after it. That's it for us this week. And a reminder, we're here with you every week, the rest of the season. So Mondays, 3:30 Eastern time up until 4, we're live. If you're catching us later on, join us, ask a question during the show, prospect, fantasy, draft, the whole deal. We cover it all here, Global Perspective on Hot Sheet. And look out for those top prospect profiles that we have all over the Baseball America YouTube channel. See you next week.